Good morning. Goeiedag, fellow South Africans, from a very nice Brisbane, beautiful day out here. And what I'm going to be doing in this video is giving you some information that we discussed at the live stream last night, and that is looking at refugee status, but refugee status particularly for coming to Australia. So this is Australia 101 if you look at refugee status. It does not apply to other countries, so they might have different sets of rules and so on. So I've set it out as a series of questions and then answers, so you can actually look at specific areas. Okay, so let's start off with the very basics. What's the difference between an asylum seeker, a refugee, and a migrant? Okay, an asylum seeker is a person looking for protection because they fear persecution or they have experienced violence or human rights violations. Now, before you can become a refugee, you have to seek asylum. So everybody goes through the asylum seeker stage. A refugee is a person who asked for protection and was given refugee status. That's when you actually become a refugee. They may have been resettled in another country or be waiting for resettlement. Not every asylum seeker becomes a refugee, but every refugee starts out as an asylum seeker. A migrant is a person who leaves or flees their home to go to new places, usually abroad, to seek opportunities or safer and better prospects. Migration can be voluntary or involuntary, but most of the time a combination of choices and constraints is involved. Okay, very important question next. Is it illegal to come to Australia by boat or plane and then seek asylum? And the simple answer is no. If you come here and seek asylum, you're not going to be thrown behind bars. If you arrive by boat without a visa, they will put you in mandatory detention. But if you arrive by plane and you have a visa, then it's fine, and it's quite valid for you to actually ask for asylum, and you won't be arrested or anything like that. So just getting back to this point, everyone has the right to seek asylum from persecution. It is not illegal for people to flee persecution in their homeland or to cross borders without documents or passports in order to seek asylum. It is also not a crime under Australian law to arrive here by plane with a valid visa and ask for protection. All people who arrive here by boat without a valid visa are subject to mandatory detention. Next question. Do all people seeking asylum come to Australia by boat? And the simple answer is no. Many people arrive by plane with a valid visa and that can then claim asylum while they are here. Unlike people who arrive in Australia by boat, people who arrive by plane are generally not subject to mandatory detention because you've got that visa. Does Australia have more asylum claims than other countries? That's the next question. No. Most people seek asylum in their neighbouring countries if it is safe for them to do so. Around the world in 2017, 1.9 million claims for asylum were lodged with governments or through the UNHCR. Now, of these, 36,200 were made in Australia. Now, don't choose the UNHCR as a way to go, and you'll see why in a second. While the number is fewer than 2% of the world's total, this is Australian claims, it is particularly high for Australia. By comparison, the United States of America received the highest number of new asylum applications with 3,331,700 in 2017. Does Australia have more refugees than other countries? No, we don't. Most refugees reside in their neighbouring countries. It is safe if it is safe for them to do so. Okay, in 2017, 3.5 million refugees around the world had their status recognized or were successfully resettled. Of those, 23,111, or 1.65%, were assisted by Australia. Now that's about 66% of the people who came into the country seeking asylum. So it's quite a high percentage. By comparison, Turkey granted protection to 681,000 refugees, while Bangladesh registered 655,500 in a refugee-like situation from Myanmar. And that was a terrible situation that happened last year there. Okay, is there a queue for people who come to Australia seeking asylum? No, there is not a queue. Some people believe that people seeking asylum and who come to Australia by plane are queue jumpers and are taking the place of people who have registered with UNHCR or those who are waiting in refugee camps. The UN resettlement system does not operate in this way. A queue implies that resettlement is an orderly process, and by waiting for a period of time, a person will reach the front of the queue. The UN resettlement system prioritizes asylum seekers for resettlement according to considered needs rather than waiting time. For example, refugees waiting for resettlement may return home if conditions in their home country improve. In 2017, there were 25.4 million refugees worldwide. In the same year, the number of globally available resettlement places was reduced from 163,000 to 75,000, just 75,000, despite UNHCR assessing 1.2 million refugees were in need of desperate resettlement. So you can see that it's not a great plan to count on the UNHCR. The Refugee Council of Australia says that if the global queue did actually exist, people joining the back of the queue might wait for more than 180 years for resettlement through the UNHCR program. Where do most refugees come from? At the end of 2017, there were 25.4 million refugees worldwide. More than 2/3 came from just 5 countries. Syria, 6.3 million. Afghanistan, 2.6 million. South Sudan, 2.4 million. Myanmar, 1.2 million. And Somalia, about 1 million people. In 2016-17, Australia granted a total of 21,968 resettlement visas under the humanitarian program. The majority of these people came from Iraq, 7,478, Syria, 6,261, Afghanistan, 1,958, and Myanmar, 1,747. Very few South Africans up until now have actually sought asylum in Australia. And obviously if you have been the victim of violent attacks and you are fearing for your life, you have a very good case to actually become a refugee here in Australia. Okay, so why do refugees and people seeking asylum move across many countries? People can be forced to migrate because of conflict, persecution, environmental degradation, poverty, and development. Most refugees and people seeking asylum reside in their neighboring countries where it is safe when it is safe for them to do so. In many countries, including in Asia Pacific, refugees and people seeking asylum do not have a legal right to stay, work, or access basic services. This affects their ability to remain safe and support the most basic needs for their families in these unsafe countries. Generally, people seeking asylum have very limited options available to them. Where people can exercise choice in determining their Where people can exercise choice in determining their destination country, they can be influenced by the presence of social networks, historical ties between the countries of origin and destination, and the knowledge or belief that a certain country is democratic where human rights and the rule of law are likely to be respected. And of course, Australia is one of those countries. But I would make the point here that there are millions of South Africans already in Australia. And so South African refugees would fit in very, very well culturally. Okay, next question. What is the need for someone to be granted refugee status and allowed to stay in Australia? Okay, this is an important one. Under international law, whether in Australia or another country, a person undergoes a rigorous process to prove that they have a well-founded fear of persecution before they are granted refugee status. This may be for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, resulting in the suffering or serious human rights violations, including torture or cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. Next question. Do people seeking asylum come to Australia for economic reasons? In the majority of people who apply for asylum do so because their lives and safety are under threat from war, violence, or human rights abuses in the homeland. Now, most people do not wish to leave their homes, families, friends, and communication that they know and love. Now, that's exactly the situation of what's happening in South Africa. A lot of people feel they're stuck there because they've got family there. But, you know, an individual member can actually seek asylum in Australia if they've been a victim of violence and fear for their lives. Are refugees and people seeking asylum security checked? Yes, all refugees and people seeking asylum undergo security checks. In Australia, the Department of Home Affairs can refuse to grant or cancel a personal visa if they are at risk to the Australian community. Under both the UN Refugee Convention and Australian law, the right to refugee protection is not given to anyone strongly suspected of having committed a crime against peace, a war crime, a crime against humanity, or a serious non-political crime outside their country of refuge, or anyone guilty of any acts contrary to the purpose and principles of the United Nations. Now, the reason they say crimes outside their own country, because under the refugee status, Australia is not allowed to contact the South African authorities and say that, hey, you've claimed refugee status here, because that could actually detrimentally affect you if your asylum is not accepted. So basically, the checking of your past history is fairly limited in what they can do. What benefits do people seeking asylum receive from the government? Okay, where people are eligible for support, the Australian government provide basic income support, a maximum of 89% of the Centrelink unemployment benefit, which comes to about 550 Australian dollars every fortnight. Through community service providers who will be there to support you, the government also provides limited assistance to this group to meet their basic needs, such as assisting people to access health and social services. So you'll get access to hospitals and other social services to make sure that you could survive in Australia. Not every person seeking asylum in the community is eligible for support under the program. People who are not eligible receive no government financial assistance, and I guess that's mainly people who've got a fair amount of income that they can fall back on. The majority of people seeking asylum living in the community do so with access to a few resources and almost no possessions. Okay, so you basically got to start again. They want to work and be self-reliant, but often find it difficult because of limited English language skills. Now, that's obviously not the case with white South Africans coming here. The other issues are lack of recognition of overseas qualifications, which is an issue for skilled South Africans because If you're a doctor, for example, you've got to basically rewrite exams, and it takes up to about a year with having someone next to you who's qualified, suitably qualified, before you can actually go through the process of becoming a qualified doctor in Australia. Okay, what benefits do refugees receive? When refugees arrive in Australia through the humanitarian program, they arrive as a permanent resident and can immediately access income support payments in the same way as any other Australian permanent resident. Now, as a asylum seeker, you wouldn't be part of that because they would have to do those background checks. How do refugees contribute to the Australian economy? Well, humanitarian entrants make an important contribution to Australia in many areas, including social engagement, workforce participation, business ownership, and volunteering within the community. Most humanitarian entrants humanitarian entrance families, especially those in the second generation, are able to adjust effectively over time and eventually match, and in many cases exceed, Australian-born levels of economic and social contribution. Many of Australia's successful and respected citizens have been refugees, having fled their home country to escape persecution. So that's like a fairly basic introduction to what is asylum, what is refugee status, and it's clearly a two-stage process. You arrive in somewhere in Australia on the plane, and as you're going through customs, it's probably the best time to do it, just saying, hey, I want to seek asylum. And what they'll do is they'll take details, rather like what we were talking about with Fiji. They'll take details, you'll have to fill in documents and so on. And then your claim will be assessed. And if you've got a good case, there's a good chance that you'll get refugee status. And if you've got family and friends in Australia, that's a huge bonus. All right, guys, I hope that helps, and we'll see you Sunday night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, for the next live stream. And if you haven't subscribed until now in my channel, please subscribe now, because that way you'll be kept informed. We do discuss some really interesting subjects here. Alrighty, take care.